morning, good evening, wherever you, gentle viewer, might find yourself. This is Commander Culture, joined by Ms. Cherie Chrétien and
Hello.
Templar. Today we're going to be talking about two sort of concepts in our thesis about the way to reclaim Western civilization, Novus Occidentalis, as we ostentatiously named it in our first slideshow. Today we're going to be looking at the most critical or dangerous step, which is chaos, and then the most hopeful step, which is rebirth or renaissance. And that is what we're looking at in our immediate present and in our imminent future. And so it's worth talking about. It's worth going over in detail. And we thank you very much for joining us. Ms. Cherie, good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Excellent. And Mr. Templar, thank you for joining us.
Good as always.
We were not broadcasting last week, and this week my call was not able to go out to my fellow social Galaxians, so we may be a little bit light on viewership on the live stream here, but that's okay. We can increase that by people sharing and subscribing, but we know that we do get views on the repeat, and so that's what we're kind of looking at today. Let's go ahead and pull up the slide here, and this was
before we jump into this, we can just review quick how we got here. We're talking about the steps to rebuild the West, and the steps 1 through 5. First one being resilience, and that's more so making yourself resilient on an individual level, basically hardening yourself against any degree of hardship that might come your way. And then that on a communal level with step 2, community, basically, getting your village set up. Obviously, this is figuratively speaking, but it could be literal. But basically, getting your community together, the people who they don't even need to be in proximity to you necessarily, just a group of compatriots that you could rely on when the hard times come. So resilience, individual level, resilience on a communal level. And then step 3, once you're ready, basically start accelerating, and you're essentially setting conditions for entropy. You are chipping away at the foundations of this disgusting Leviathan that has been erected to, sap your humanity from you. But that sort of step 3 is kind of sowing the seeds for what would come to follow, and that is what we're going to talk about today: chaos. What happens after the collapse? And when we say collapse, it doesn't need to happen overnight, and it doesn't even need to be man-made, but it's basically the dissolution of the current infrastructure and the current powers that be, to the point where you're basically only left with your community and yourself. And so we'll talk about chaos today, and then we will talk about, after that, renaissance, the rebirth, the sort of rising from the ashes, how you could capitalize on the absence of a power that basically prevents you from building the world that you want to build. And what do we want to build? The Western world. So that's kind of where we came from and a little bit of where we're going. But unless you got something else.
No, I appreciate that. That was a useful recap. Hopefully we all sort of remember that line. And I think that just the events of the last couple of weeks and months have really borne this out. Collapse is on the way. And as I was pointing out to a colleague, a friend, it's almost intentional, where we're at with Ukraine, where we're at with the economic situation. If you look just beyond the horizon at wheat production, if you look at fertilizer availability, if you look at the infrastructure as far as transport, the evil powers that be, as Templar was referencing, are chipping away at the very foundations of the things that create Western civilization, but at the same time that support their own power structure. And so what is inevitable is a collapse. they believe that they can manage that collapse and turn us into, in my estimation, sort of a neo-feudal worldwide serfdom. And but what we believe is that we ourselves, as members of the perhaps ideological or political right, can harness the chaos that will ensue in that collapse to our benefit. Any thoughts on that there, Templar?
Yeah, it comes to mind. There was a funny meme that I saw, and it was kind of directed at women, but it was basically what women think they'll be doing after the collapse, and it was a picture of Jennifer Lawrence, and the whole Katniss Everdeen. They think they're gonna like be little bow hunters or something, and I don't know, just like LARP around in the woods or something. And then it's like what they'll actually be doing, and it was a bunch of women standing on a street corner. And you could use your imagination what they're soliciting in that instance, but basically it's kind of an extension of this sort of like Reddit mindset that we have, where we're incapable of fathoming a world where there are actual hard times, or there are actual food shortages. Nobody who is alive in America today has really experienced that. And kind of see it like the people who go to Ukraine and then get smoked by airstrikes. It's like, what'd you think was going to happen? Like, this is not the internet. This is real life. And I think people need to start wrapping their head around this. And if you can wrap your head around this concept before you have to learn it in real time, you're going to be much better off. And better yet, if you can start just taking steps to insulate yourself from that, you're going to be better off as well. But yeah, I mean, look, we're still accelerating. Chaos has not hit yet. We are still accelerating. And so, again, once this does inevitably hit, we need to be able to capitalize on it. And what's going to happen is you're going to see people either run directly into the arms of the state, which is what they want. When people are hungry, the government wants them to just enter the FEMA camps on their own. Like that would be, I guess, the analogy that everybody loves, like a Nazi's wet dream, is just having all of their political prisoners walk into the camps on their own initiative, so you'll either be in that camp of walking into the open arms of the government on their terms, or you'll be in the camp of, I've taken the steps that I need to not have to beg for the things that I need, and I can also preserve my self-determination. And so, you can either eat the bug paster in a FEMA camp, or you can, live in the woods, I guess, as God intended. But we'll see how that turns out, and we'll see if we can paint a picture for you, and what this chaos scenario looks like.
Yeah, that's some good thoughts. I think, I like that you mentioned those, those sort of Redditor type people, and I think it's an excellent framing of our sort of thesis that we've talked about, where you don't have to go out in search of the chaos, the collapse. The collapse will eventually come to you, and these people who went out there looking for trouble, they found it. It actually exists in the real world. Here in the mainstream media bubble that most Americans exist in, the real world is sort of this phantasmagorical, foggy mist of, well, maybe it's Hollywood, or maybe it's, a production, or maybe it's, gaslighting, or maybe it's propaganda, but it actually exists out there. And it's only because of the strength of the pillars of, the American way, if you want to put it that way, Western civilization, Christendom, that have kept those sort of realities a little bit at bay. Where, as you said, Native Americans, natural-born Americans, not the Somalis that we've imported, but those native natural-born Americans are heritage Americans, right? Have not experienced hunger, have not experienced war, unless they subject themselves to Baltimore, and really don't have a clue about what is out there, but is steadily stalking closer and closer to them and to us, really. And that's why we say at the same time, start with yourself, start with your family, start with your community, and then build out a defensive ring. If you're familiar with the history of World War II, this is, think of like what Japan did in World War II, where they took one island after another, after another, after another, knowing that the inevitable storm was going to come in. And the further out that they could put credible, meaningful defenses, the longer it was going to be before that storm reached their own shores. And they knew it was going to reach their own shores, as do we. Right? We know that this is going to come to our hearth, whether it's in the form of an economic collapse, whether it's in the form of a race war, whether it's in the form of an open political coup.
Yeah, it could even be a natural disaster that other people opportunistic, basically think Katrina, but like countrywide. And all you have to do, like what we saw in Katrina, is just shut the power off and, hey, have rule laws out the window.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry. It had even occurred to me in something I was reading and looking at over the week that it could be a essentially a man-made artificial natural disaster where you have a heat wave and they say, oh, the grids went down X, Y, and Z. Really, they're sitting there pulling the grids down, or they're having their hackers doing it. But the end effect is that the grids are in fact down. And now you have a situation that constitutes an emergency. And as Rahm Emanuel said, you never want to let an emergency go to waste. And that environment is the one in which, people on our side, if we're prepared, right, we can be instruments of chaos to the attempt of this globalist American empire, this neoliberal order, this, Soros New World Economic Forum based Leviathan, as I think Templar put it, to be agents of chaos against that attempt to consolidate their power in the crisis that they create. Mm-hmm. Because even a natural disaster, there is going to be famine. There is absolutely, here is, I'm not Templar, I'm Commander Culture. Here's Commander Culture predicting once again, I forget, I get carried away, what's going to happen in the future. We called the Ukraine thing. We know that there's going to be other wars, but we also know that based on this event that's going on in Ukraine, that there's going to be massive grain shortages, especially in the third world, which is going to cause famine. There were news stories out. I think Ms. Cherique shared one with me where it said, very blithely, they said, oh, you can expect 500 million people coming from Africa trying to get into Europe in the next couple of years. 500 million. That's an awful lot of boats to sink in the Mediterranean. And that's a crisis that they're trying to perpetuate. That's going to seem like a natural disaster. Oh, crop failures. Oh, boo-hoo. When it's planned, when it's organized, when it's ordered as part of their attempts to bring themselves to power via collapse. And we have to be that. The
destabilization that was brought about by the wars in Africa and the Middle East. And so it's really that times 10 indiscriminately across the entire continent. And that's kind of the scenario that we'd be facing. And then just like you saw, with something like Afghanistan, like, oh, the country's falling to the Taliban. What's the first thing we got to do? Fly 100,000 Afghanis into America. It's like, what this is going to be the most engaged attempt at displacing. You pick up the entire population of Africa and put them in a European or a white country or something like that. So that's what the effort that we're going to see, and it's going to be what we've seen already, but times 10 perhaps.
There we go. It's something that we've seen for a long time. The invade the world, invite the world scenario, where we go out and we bomb somebody, and then, oh, look at that! Now that we spent billions of dollars on our military-industrial complex, now we have to spend billions of dollars on our social-industrial complex to take care of the Hmong or the Vietnamese boat people or the Mariel boat lift. It's always boats, or the caravans coming from Central America. And like you said, it's always been sort of, there's always been a purpose, like, oh, we need these, Mexicans to pick our lettuce, otherwise it'll be day without a Mexican and the jobs that we won't do, blah 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 blah. Or oh, these people supported us in Vietnam and now we have to blah 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 because their families. But with the Afghanistan thing in particular in America and the Syrian quote crisis in Europe, it was so nakedly without sort of a pretense, right? It's just like, oh, we're just going to bring these people in because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, at first it was translators and those who assisted like American efforts while we were there, and then it was just literally men, women, and children get on the plane, come to America. It was like, why? We didn't have 100,000 translators. We had they would have brought more if they could.
And I'm of a view, and you may disagree with me here on this, Templar, because you're a softer soul than I. But because I was explaining this to a good friend who probably hates my guts based on this whole Ukraine situation and my views on it. But I'm a realist. I am with a capital R. Realpolitik is the blood that flows through my veins. Otto von Bismarck is my patron saint. My secular saint. And it's like, look at it this way. Every single person who supported the United States government in Afghanistan is a traitor. They are a traitor to their people, right? Think of it from the perspective of the Afghanis, right? Here they are doing their own Afghanistan thing, screwing goats and little boys and whatever they've done for hundreds of years. And then this foreign power comes in and wants to set up sprinklers and women's education and all kinds of weird shit that they've never heard of in their life and never thought of and don't care about. And a bunch of people say, oh, you're paying me money. Oh, you're giving me, vouchers for the Burger King on Bagram Air Base. Yeah, sure. I'll go reject my religion, go reject my family's norms, go reject everything that my culture sort of holds near and dear, and throw in with these weird foreigners and their weird ways against people who are defending my traditional cultural way of life, right? And they did. Now, there was a very slim likelihood that America was going to be successful. Anybody with a brain and an education that went back as far as the Soviet penetration of Afghanistan a couple decades before, or had seen a Rambo movie, would have been able to figure out. But these people went in all the same, and they were a traitor to their people. Now, I think that the American soldiers that were there were more virtuous and represented a better culture and civilization than the backwards, retrograde, third world, people that lived there. But the fact remains that they were a traitor to their culture. We don't need traitors in our country. We've got plenty already. And we certainly don't need people who are now going to rely on our fiscal teat to make up for their extremely poor lack of planning and foresight and their desire to chase filthy lucre instead of, any other choice that they could have made in their life. So, and I've told this story on Social Galactic before. I'll tell it again here very briefly, just so that people understand that I'm serious when I say this. And maybe I told it before. Tell me if stop me if I did. But, I was taking an Uber in Washington, D.C. one time for various reasons. And the driver was like, oh, yeah, and I'm an Afghan guy, but I'm here, translator. And I was here and I'm here illegally because they won't, do my visa or whatever and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, really? Oh, okay. And he's like, do you work for the government? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, great, you can help me because you work in the government in Washington, D.C. Here's all my information. And he gave me all of his information. I'm like, I didn't even want to talk to him. I just want to sit there and look out the window. And these stupid idiots in the Ubers want to jabber at you all day.
Well, because they know the average person is going to bend over backwards to sell out their country here at home to try to help this dude who shouldn't even be here in the first place. But continue.
Exactly. No, thank you. Well, I'm at the end of my story because I took his information and I went home and I called immigration services and I said, hey, this guy with all this information is driving Ubers and he's in the country illegally. You might want to look into it. Click, hang up on the hotline. And I felt that I had done my patriotic duty to Heritage America. Would that I could do that every day because it's like I don't give two flying fucks if he translated in Afghanistan. I don't really care. Do you know how short our war there would have been if nobody wanted to translate? It would have been really damn short. And we wouldn't have had opportunity to bring back all of these other people, I use that term loosely, from there into our country now. What is it now, 100,000 or something like that, we said?
Yeah, they did 100,000. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they're probably still doing it. I mean, and it's sick. That's part of their attempt to generate the collapse, because in the collapse, those people are all uniformly going to be against Heritage America.
Yeah, that is the saddest thing of all of this is, what's going to happen after. Well, two things are going to happen. One, the collapse itself causes something like, if you're ever curious about what happens when you deprive a population of their food supply, just Google St. Matthew's Island. Yeah, I won't rehash. It was basically a case study of some reindeer that were put on an island in the hopes of populating the island, and people, anyone on a ship coming by could basically like re-up on food with reindeer that are there. They ate all the food, and then the reindeer, that is, and then they all died out. There were 6,000, and there ended up with 42. And this is just like, what is the sustainable population for a given plot of land? And you can actually do these biological calculations. And then right now we obviously live in a hyper efficient sort of world, and that's not necessarily a problem, but it is when you eliminate the systems that allow this abundance, that allows this population to be of this size. So you take out the abundance, then the population problem really starts to show its face. And it is, if you grow sustainably, the Amish will never have a population problem because they are doing everything sustainably. But when you have, multi-thousand acres of monoculture food growth, and then you use that as the basis of your entire food economy, guess what happens when you take that out, like you just did with the wheat production in the USSR, Ukraine and Russia. I was jumping mentally to the communists doing this. This isn't the first time this has happened. If you want an example of what happens when you do this, just look at the Holodomor in Ukraine. Ironically, it's where it happened. And 8 million people die of starvation. And so multiply that across now the entire planet. We'll see how bad it gets. But so on one hand, the population problem kind of solves itself in the sense that you're going to have ravenous people either dying of starvation or killing each other off over food. And then the other problem is when you move these people into these countries, it's basically like pouring everybody into a gladiatorial arena. We are in an artificial peace right now. The only reason why there's peace is because there's a bigger gun, that is the government, that's kind of pointing a gun at both sides, saying neither of you attack each other. And as soon as that entity goes away, you see what happens. It's basically every man for themselves. And then you get the scenario that Khmer culture has described, where, what is it, Yugoslavia sort of combined with what?
Yugoslavia times Rwanda.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So you're basically creating that scenario, and you're just adding as many people to all of the belligerent sides as possible, and then you're lighting a match and dropping in there and stepping back. And so all this, the bloodshed itself will be sad, and there will be bloodshed. And really, it's on the hands of the people who are creating this scenario in the first place. And it'd be difficult to think about that, when you're basically like defending your family and your house. But it's like, you could just pause for a second and think, wait a minute, this is happening because some yuppie in Washington either wanted to feel good about themselves or knew exactly what they were doing and genuinely hated you and your family, and so intentionally brought these people from these other places and these other cultures that are not at all compatible with yours and put them up in homes right next to you with your money at your expense. And now that the lights have shut off and those people are hunting people that look like you, you can rest assured that the blood is on those people's hands. The people.
Yes, I think that's a very important point for good Christians like us to understand and sort of meditate on, is that when the time comes for a complete a failure of law and order, like you were describing, a reckoning, I guess, that there will be blood, and that blood is not going to be on your hands if you're defending your family. And again, this might sound all sort of black pill, but it's really not. The whole point of this, discussion today is the white pill, because we are on the right, because we are on the side of goodness, beauty, and truth, because we are on the side of nature and reality instead of fantasy and sort of human conjuring. We will win, and you individually may or may not win or live to see the victory, depending on how successful you are at doing what we are saying about building into that community. Because when the what is James Wesley Rawls call it? He calls it the Golden Horde. When the Golden Horde, courses out across the country in search of people like you and me, whom to devour, because their EBT gibbed out. I mean, look, you want to have that community. You want to have your family intact. You want to have that solid societal structure in small, so that you can protect yourself, and you will come out on top invariably. Right? I mean, we go back. I think Templar and I kind of like the imagery of the whole Rourke's drift thing, and try to forget that there was a Custer's last stand. But small groups of Western men can defend against much larger, much more savage hordes simply by preparation. Just simple, dumb preparation.
You got the 300 Spartans, the Rourke's Drift. You also have the men who began the Reconquista,
Hamburger Hill in Vietnam.
Yeah. Or the elves at Helm's Deep.
Speaking of imaginary, but yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. So, that don't let any of the impending reality get you down. And I think if you're listening to us, you won't. Right? You were prepared for the Ukraine situation. You are prepared for a reduction in government or rights that are protected by the government. You're prepared for a reduction in even living standards and food. But most of the people out there, they're just simply not. And and so that while that's very sad, I think that the important thing to do is to solidify your immediate base. There's a big discussion in the prepper community about, well, do you shoot all people that try and come inside your perimeter, or do you grow your community because there's strength in numbers? And that's a decision that you'll have to make at the time when it comes. But I think that initially you should have the idea that you're going into a very difficult time with just the people that you have sort of on hand and the preparations that you've made while the sun was shining. And the sun is darkening. I think it's pretty obvious. And I think that Templar would agree. I think that Ms. Cherie agrees. Ms. Cherie, what are your thoughts on this so far?
Well, the longer you talk, the more things I keep thinking about. And
get a notepad like Templar.
Right? No, the first thing I want to touch on is it's funny how, the 100,000 from Afghanistan, that's the same number of so-called, refugees we're taking from Ukraine. Although I've seen pictures where the people don't really look Ukrainian. And then I saw a video not too long ago where I'll just say a teen, we know what that means, was getting very loud and aggressive because he was at a deli and a BLT cost $6. So he was not happy at all.
Yeah, you can expect more of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because those BLTs can't be made at home for a fraction of the price. Heaven forbid. And so when the Gibbs give out, I kind of like that. I should make a T-shirt. And it's going to be absolute malarkey. as
the
our
number of
pretender in
people
chief says.
who chimp out, so to speak, is going up. That number of people is increasing, and then the conditions that justify said chimp out are becoming more frequent and more intense. So it's just like, hey, the writing is on the wall. Here you go.
Exacerbated by the plot shot. Yeah,
it's perfect that we're talking about this tonight, because literally less than an hour before we got on, I was messaging with my mom. And I keep an eye on like the news back home and everything. And I've noticed that, like, not just because it's getting warm outside, but the different stuff going on seems to be more intense and just out there at times. And she even commented on it, and she's more of like the, boomer ostrich head in the sand. It's always been like this, yada yada. But it's like she's finally starting to like look around, I guess. So that's good, at least.
Yeah, and Commander Culture, if you could actually kind of describe the scenario, because even to that first point, chaos is not the same as collapse, and we talked about some of the things that would foment this chaos. But can you kind of just off the top of your head maybe describe some of the catalysts, and then maybe what these scenarios look like? You had already mentioned something like a cyber attack, whether that's like false flag or genuine. And based on the number of electronic devices that we use for our critical infrastructure, that could basically shut off literally whatever you want: fresh water, food, electricity. So something like a cyber attack being the catalyst, and then how that scenario plays out. Does the government demand everyone get into a FEMA camp? Does the government use this as a pretense for activating the National Guard, and now you have federal or disseminating the military and using federal military forces as local police forces, and then getting people used to this norm? What kind of scenarios do you see playing out?
I'm not to address the last part of your question. I don't. It's so hard now to predict how everything is going to unfold. Miss Cherie actually shared with me a great meme, I think last week, where it said basically the Western world is starting to look like Brave New World from Aldous Huxley's book, and Russia, China, sort of the Eurasian center, is starting to look like 1984. And so in the past we had always thought of, well, is it going to be like this or is it going to be like this? And we see sort of a chilling hybrid of both. I think an important first step to addressing your question is to understand how collapse and chaos are juxtaposed. They are not the same thing. And in fact, they stand at variance to one another, I would say. My belief is that collapse is it's a preventable complexity. It's a reduction of the complexity, but it is okay. Good, excellent. We're thinking this through as live. You're listening to the thought process, people. It's a reduction of the complexity, but it's intentional. Collapse can always be staved off, if only through sheer will. There's an excellent book by notorious liberal Jared Diamond, which is called Collapse, and he looks at several case studies of collapse in the through the lens of a biologist. And Templar already mentioned the St. Matthew's Island study, and Jared Diamond talks about an even simpler sort of a study that looks at basically bacteria, where they will just continually expand until they have run out their resources, and then they will collapse into annihilation, basically. And that is preventable as long as the fundamentals and the foundations of the civilization and the culture, with a capital C, like Commander Culture, that built those complexities remain. As long as the culture that built those complexities remains, collapse can be staved off. What I believe is happening is that bad actors, the globalist American empire, as we would call it, is actively jackhammering those foundations to generate a collapse because they believe that they can profit from the collapse. Chaos, on the other hand, is the natural reestablishment of equilibrium, right? Or of order out
So
of.
maybe something like a dam burst and the water is chaotically like flowing through and destroying things that people thought were safe or something downstream, but in reality, all that's happening is the earth is basically returning to its natural state.
Yeah, let's use that example of a dam bursting. So if there is no dam in the first place, if what you have is a natural system, if what you have is the political and ideological right, that river will at times be dangerous to the people living there. But most of the time, it will be a life bringer, right? It'll bring resources, it will bring food, it will bring transportation. The the opposite of that would be building a dam. That is the ideological and political left that says we will create a human construct that will control for all time this force of nature, and then we can harness it to our will, and then we can control everybody both above and below wherever this dam is constructed. But we know that that human created institution will eventually crumble, or it will be destroyed by a British dam buster plane or whatever. And when it does, the catastrophe that will ensue on people both above and below that dam will be far greater than anything that would have happened in a natural system with the natural rise and flow of that river. I hope that makes sense, right? So by emphasizing the natural order, by emphasizing the right as in the correct, as emphasizing the right as in the political and ideological right, and emphasizing a system that is based in reality, you have some pain but lots of gain. With the left, the mechanistic sort of utilitarian human uber alles, attempt to mock the creation that is God. God said, right, in Genesis, he said, be fruitful and multiply, you have dominion over the earth. He didn't say make mockeries of my natural creation and then destroy one another with it, which is what the left attempts to do. And when they do, it creates much, 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 much more misery at all times. The second that you build a dam, for example, it changes weather systems. They have this problem in the northern half of South America, with all these rivers flowing down from the Andes, where it's like rain stops or rain starts in certain areas because they keep building these dams. The same problem is happening in China with the Three Gorges Dam. And all the way up to you have more catastrophic floods, you have a more perilous sort of situation, and that's what we're looking at. And so chaos is the fix for a collapse engineered by the ideological and political left, by the globalist American empire. They are engineering a collapse. And we will certainly go into that. But we hope by acknowledging and harnessing chaos, the natural entropy that will come, to be able to prevent a return of this current regime, right? This globalist American empire.
The center of gravity for, what do you think the center of gravity for, I guess, our current way of life, what would they target if they did the cyber attack? If they wanted to foment chaos or cause a collapse, what would they target? Would it look more like it seems like they're targeting everything simultaneously and they're leaving all their doors open. But, I think the grid is probably a salient point. Like you see that in California, they're like, oh, we're going to have rolling brownouts or whatever. It's like, what's the difference between them shutting off the power because they're incapable of generating the energy needed to sustain the demand, or like some terrorist blowing up an actual like power facility? It's functionally the same thing for everyone who's there. So how do you see food shortages being the most salient point, fuel shortages being the most salient point, the grid being the most thing?
You're asking like what the catalyst would be?
Yeah.
I don't really know, because when
kind of like what to look out for, I guess.
The thing to look out for is when you go to the bank and you can't get your money. I would say that, or get money in general. That I would say is the big red flag. The Cyprus moment, I call it, where, if you recall, not many years ago, there was a lot of economic chaos in Cyprus, which was, by the way, engineered by the globalist American empire as a way of poking Russia's finger, poking the finger in Russia's eye. Long story short, there. And I think that however they do that, however it comes out, by whatever mechanism that happens, someday you will go to the ATM and you will simply not be able to withdraw any money. Maybe you'll be getting paid in your bank account still. Maybe you won't. But that's, to me personally, is the big trigger, because then there will either come forward with a solution, use our US dollar coin cryptocurrency, or use our handy dandy, barcode scanner that we implant in your wrist, or use our US government credit card that we just install, and that way you don't have to do your taxes anymore, because after all, who likes doing their taxes? And so it's all automatic, or however it is, or it's just like, screw you, everyone for themselves, because now the money system is broken down and the fractional reserve banking system has come home to roost. I think that is what's looking in the future. That would be prior to any kind of food shortage. But it could be exacerbated by a food shortage, or a supply breakdown, or a fuel crisis, or a grid shutdown, or a terrorist attack, or just another medical emergency. We've all heard, I think the people listening to this broadcast have heard the rumblings of I wonder when they're going to release airborne Ebola, or I wonder when they're going to say that this COVID vaccine that we didn't know was going to give you AIDS now gave you AIDS, and by the way, now you can catch it through the air, and people start dropping dead, whatever, something weird like that. I really honestly don't know. And the reason I say I don't know is not because it's a cop-out, it's because I'm trying to be honest. And in my studies of collapsing modern civilizations, it doesn't help us much to look at the Mayans and the Vikings and Greenland and stuff, but modern civilizations, is to look at what happened in Yugoslavia. And in Yugoslavia, it all sort of happened at once. But the thing that all people came back and said, whether it's looking at the Argentine collapse or stuff that was going on in Rwanda, or / Zimbabwe, or other places, Yugoslavia, is when we couldn't get any money, that's when everyone knew. The boomers out there who were like, oh, I just, watch the mainstream media, or the head in the sand people who were like, oh, why don't we all just get along? Or the people that said diversity is our strength, these kind of morons will finally have the clue bat hit them upside the head, at 100 frames per second, when they can't get any money and they can't purchase stuff. And I think that day is coming very, very soon. Of course, this is what I thought back in 2008 when I was voting for, Ron Paul and people like that, who were saying our monetary system is unsustainable. But the monetary system is the linchpin that holds together the entire neoliberal order. I mean, it is
monetary system. Do you mean like specifically the use of the U.S. dollar, or the Federal Reserve, or the ability to transact?
I mean, in specific, the U.S. dollar as backed by petroleum, but in general, I mean the fractional reserve banking system, visualized by people like Keynes and brought forward into the modern era into sort of magical sorcery lunacy, like modern monetary theory. That whole sort of long-term abomination. And anybody that bought into that magic will find themselves in a very bad way.
Yeah, and so for those of you who don't know, fractional reserve banking is just when a bank does not hold all of the money that people believe to be held inside of it. So when you put your money in a bank, it's not like they actually have that much money either in physical dollars or any other asset on the premises. And this is what happens when you get runs on the bank: is everybody at the same time goes to pull their money out of the bank, and the bank is like, yeah, we actually only carry 50% of the money that is in circulation in our bank right now. And on one hand, it's a useful financial tool because you can stimulate an economy with basically more dollars than actually exist, because while simultaneously people believe they have money in the bank, there's also money that's being circulated around the economy. But again, the chickens come home to roost when either there's a run on the bank, which isn't as it's not difficult to have nowadays, or to mitigate that, because most things are electronic, so you can just the bank can just add zeros onto the end of people's bank accounts, and no harm, no foul. But when it really starts becoming worrisome is you basically see it on a national level, and that's when everybody in the country, including the Federal Reserve, looks around and goes, huh, "Yeah, sorry, it was all fake." And this you almost saw this happen in the end of Bretton Woods, when the U.S. The U.S. did not voluntarily decide to disconnect the dollar from the gold standard. They had to out of necessity, because there was more dollars circulating around in the global economy than there was actual gold being held in the United States. And so you essentially saw a global run on the bank with the US, and that essentially forced our hand to disconnect the dollar from the gold standard, because again, it was fake. It didn't exist.
Yeah, and at that time, sensible countries continued to pile up as much gold as they possibly could, and countries that were either drunk on their own sort of opium, or were forced by necessity to function on a U.S. dollar system only, got rid of gold hand over fist. And so what we will see, I believe, going forward is that countries and individuals, by the way, who prepared with hard assets, which include gold and silver and land and probably cryptocurrencies, will be able to weather this storm much better than people who absolutely did not. But I don't know what form this is going to take, because there's so much going on right now, as far as the pandemic, as far as the war, as far as potential false flags. There are so many black swans floating around right now that you'd injure yourself sticking your head out of the train car. Yes. Yeah, I don't know. Ms. Cherie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. I was going to say, isn't that all banks that don't have the money that they say they do?
Yeah,
all of them. They're all based on fractional reserve. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then this isn't money related, but I saw my friend had shared a tweet that she came across, and it caught my attention. It's from the Selective Service, which I'm not really familiar with, but it's just they
of course
put
you're not.
this.
It's because you're a girl.
I know.
Yeah.
They put this out on March 23rd, that in the event of a draft, our agency would partner with FEMA to provide opportunities to conscientious, I always butcher that, objectors, to ensure our nation keeps moving forward. I'm like, when did they put objectors into FEMA camps?
Yeah, well, when they said, "Oh, it's a job. You can either herd the people in, or you can join them inside. Either way, because we don't have room for conscientious objectors." Which I think, and everyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that it will be a hilarious own goal / backfire of the century / Streisand effect when they try to institute a draft. How many people, I mean, I at one point
the internet people will not have. They're like, no. Other people do this stuff. I support them with the likes on Facebook. That's my job. It's your job to go actually do the fighting.
Right. And it's, what are you going to do to me? Oh, we're going to put you in jail. Oh, okay. Well, me and 10 billion other people are not going to join your stupid army or your stupid war or whatever it is. So you can't put all of us in jail. It's just like, it's that whole, hippie thing where, what if they threw a war and nobody showed up? Because I think that that's what will happen if there's a draft. Yeah. I can't see any of these people. Like, if you've seen the fat wastes of skin and brain cells that, currently inhabit the Gen Z and the millennials, who would be the bulk of the people that are drafted. Luckily, I think I just passed my not being able to be drafted age. So cheers to me. But like
Unless
it's
they raise
laughable.
the age.
Well,
They wouldn't find anybody. If they raise the age, we Gen X people know exactly how to drop out of society because we dropped out of the boomer society a long time ago. So
I was just going to say, like, you think about the U.S. population, and of the population that they could theoretically draft in the military, a certain percentage of them are going to be like the liberals that just hate the country to begin with and could never see themselves like holding or firing a gun, and they live to occupy cubicles in high-rise skyscrapers in metropolitan areas. So I can't imagine that they would actually go anywhere or do anything. And then you have some more of the right-wing people, and half of that population are like fat Southerners who are physically incapable of picking up a weapon, even if they wanted to. If they were still drinking the red, white, and blue Kool-Aid, they wouldn't be able to go fight. And then you've got a large percentage of the country that's made up of people who shouldn't even be here in the first place, and they're only here because they're getting while the getting's good. And if they actually have to, pay, for freedom's never free. It's like, okay, well, time to pay the price. And it's like, no, I'm not here to pay the price. I'm here to get while the getting's good. They're all just gonna pack up and leave. If a Mexican is here illegally and he's no longer getting paid $15 an hour, and he's now expected to go fight for this country that he's not even a citizen in, then he's gonna be like, all right, I'm going back to Mexico. You all have fun. I'm cashing out. Basically, you'd be left with a very small percentage that is able-bodied and believes in whatever BS cause the government would try to manufacture, and they might even look around and have a moment of self-awareness and realize, wait a minute, only 5 of us showed up to the recruiting station and responded to the whole selective service call. So I actually don't think this is good odds, and I don't think this is where I should be. I'm going to go join my uncle who told me not to go and told me to join him in his cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. And so I think it would be hilarious. I hope they do it. Go ahead, please have a draft. That would be awesome. That would be hilarious. I want the U.S. government to have a draft right now. That would be actually very fun.
As you mentioned it, it was like I was imagining just like the streams of non-Americans just like going out of the country in droves. Lots of them going to Israel, lots of them going back down south, to Mexico and all these other places. And it's like, and then they bring in all these women, who are, supposedly women are going to be drafted now. And it's like, what? It would just be the most farcical clown show. Because, the way I look at it is almost anyone who's actually willing and able to serve their country, already is. I mean, they're there. There's really not a huge pool, as probably any military recruiter will tell you, of able-bodied people to like man the post. And they've already driven out a good percentage of the people that should be in the military.
That's the other thing is the military right now. Yeah, as a result of COVID, a lot of people have said like, "Oh, well, this is stupid. Like, what am I fighting for freedom back home that doesn't exist?" And things have gotten pretty stupid in the military realm, just in terms of the rules and regulations. A lot of people are drunk on being able to turn people's rights on and off with the flip of a switch, and naturally, Americans who are patriotic and strong-willed don't appreciate that, and so they are exiting the military en masse. And it's really a hilarious. Their businesses have life cycles. Any human organization kind of has life cycles where it starts out with a genuine, like, hardworking core of individuals, and basically these people will work for free, and they will work their knuckles to the bone. They will put their whole blood, sweat, and tears in this organization. As the organization grows and is successful, more people hop on, and it becomes more of a bureaucratic organization and less productive, less return on investment. And then all of the competent people who were there in the beginning and made this thing success in the beginning see what it's become and say, you know what, this isn't what we started. This isn't the same organization, and so they jump ship, and all that's left is the people who are just there to collect a paycheck. And I'm sure everybody who was in the military at one point and then got out probably thinks that way. It was legit when I was in, and then I got out, and now it's just full of like a bunch of these kinds of people or whatever. But I think really, especially since we haven't seen the military fight in any real war against a remotely near peer enemy, if we ever had to go toe to toe against Russians or Chinese, I think that I would be laughing just as hard as those Chinese people with the force that they're going up against, because you're seeing competency leave and a dead weight enter in mass.
We've kind of seen that, haven't we? I mean, with these, American volunteers and, all the Redditors and, idiots, whoever went over there got a lot of shit, but a more significant body of actual, retired military, trained operators, British special forces and American people
they
went over there. Well, they either got smoked right away, or they jumped ship. And I think that speaks a lot to the ability of those people's non-retired counterparts to stand, like you said, toe-to-toe with a near peer in any environment in which total, complete air superiority, air and naval superiority, and supply assuredness don't exist. It's like that's not really a military. That's like a video game. And it's like you don't get resupply points and things like that. When
was the last time the United States had to fight without those circumstances? Ever since the advent of the airplane, they've never had to. Never.
Yeah, or I mean, such limited circumstances, like the Battle of the Bulge, and things like that. And it's like, oh, we fought off them Nazis and stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, the Nazi they were completely expended, and they had no.
They ran out of gas. Yeah,
right, and we barely were able to beat them.
Gas. Yeah.
So it's like, come on, Chosin Reservoir. I mean, like, come on. So you're right. I mean, that's why just this whole like saber rattling, chest pounding baloney.
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad.
And that's why some people fear, by the way, like a nuclear type conflict. Because the Russians, I think, are pretty self-assured in their conventional abilities. I think that the Chinese are assured in their conventional abilities. I don't think we are at all. And when you have an unsure power with nuclear weapons, that's called destabilizing. I want to move on to our next slide if we can. Any further thoughts on this, Cherie?
Nope.
Okay. Did we get to all your points? I know we kind of...
Yes, for now.
Okay, good. Just jump right in there and talk over us if you need to, because we're both very excitable about this. So the final step is once the chaos subsides, once the collapse has taken on whatever form it's going to, you get a renaissance. Or a rebirth. That's what renaissance means. And in this sense, like, try to envision, if you can, if you're familiar with the history of like what happened in Yugoslavia after the Civil War. You had this country that was very powerful, respected, economic sort of powerhouse, such as it was, break down into the most bloody civil war that had been seen on the European continent in a very long time. And then within a very short period of time, a short, sharp period of, essentially genocide on all sides, you had all of these little tiny nations based on cultural, ethnic, and religious values break off into their own composite parts. And, you had Croatia and Serbia and Bosnia and Albania and all these different little, Macedonia. And that was what the Renaissance or rebirth looked like in Yugoslavia. And it's been very peaceful. Everyone has gotten along because the people who wouldn't get along have been killed. The people who were the cause of the not getting along, i.e., the wrong people being in the wrong neighborhood, Trayvon Martin style, got Trayvon Martined. And that was the end of it. And now you have a peaceful and relatively prosperous society. I mean, you go look on the Travel Channel, and they'll show you Croatia all over the place, or Montenegro or these kind of places. So that's what it can look like. Will it look like that in the United States with separate partitioned countries, out of what was once a thing, or will it be smaller communities, or will it be a reborn sort of rightist national entity? I don't know. But I think that here's the white pill, that, as I've said before earlier in this broadcast, we will win. We will win in the end, because we are the forces that represent realism. We're the forces that represent the natural order, and we are supporters, defenders, and proponents of the good, the beautiful, and the true. Whereas our opponents are mechanistic, whether they are sort of human oriented, and we know as Christians that human organizations are bound to fail, and also be corrupted by Satan, and so we will win. And so this is how we look at this. We're going to be the last man standing, the last community standing. You get to write your own history. You get to rewrite the history, and not W-R-I-T, but R-I-G-H-T. You get to write the history that has been wrong, because we all know, looking at the history books, looking at the propaganda that comes out, the filth that spews from Hollywood and the Mordor on the Potomac, that it's all lies, and it's directed at destabilizing and crushing our culture. But that will be reborn. So,
do you think that a strongman, it's possible for a strongman to come in and steer the ship away from this iceberg, before this stuff happens, basically avert the crisis? Or do you think where our destiny is set, and at this point we're just biding time until it happens?
That's a very good question. And again, I want to say it's both. I think that a strongman could come in, but I think that he, in order to crib a phrase from, I think, Lenin, in order to make that omelet, he would need to break a few eggs. And his ascension to power would spark a civil war. Now, it might be a much shorter, much more, shall we say, clean and orderly affair than sort of an all, against all war like you saw in Rwanda or Yugoslavia. But I think that, okay, yeah, specifically since you mentioned strongmen, I have been researching on my own and begrudgingly impressed with the example of the strongmen that we see in like Russia, Putin, right? Lukashenko in Belarus, the character, what was his name? I think it was like Nursultan or something like that in Kazakhstan. These very long running, like quasi Western strongmen, but they've been able to just sort of maintain power. I'm obviously more of a fan of traditional strongmen. I have a very soft spot in my heart for Salazar of Portugal. And I think that Franco was on the right track. But both of those men were very deeply religious. And the United States has a ways to go yet before it can become religious. And a secular strongman like the kind that you see in Eastern Europe would be more realistic. But that would spark some trouble. But it could be over with very quickly, as we saw, in Eastern Europe, how they've dealt with that kind of thing. If you don't have that, you'll have a much more long drawn out and protracted civil war. But to answer your original question, I think that a civil war of some sort is absolutely inevitable. Absolutely inevitable. I mean, Canada itself almost went into a civil war not several weeks ago, if y'all remember, right? I mean, it was very close there. If a couple of people had pulled out rifles on the wrong other kind of people, it would have all gone, belly up real quick. And the United States is one, swatting gone awry, or one racial incident gone awry, or one, I don't know,
Well, I think you specifically mentioned the racial thing, and it's like, yeah, those BLM riots happened, and people just kind of stood by and watched. But I think that there are also a lot of people who did one of two things: either said, I'm not going to be on the receiving end of that," and sort of
Yes.
banded together and got the means of defending themselves, or just left, and so that they would never be a victim of those things. But we're really seeing this divide happen where you're not getting it's like Cherie mentioned earlier, you really can't have your head in the sand anymore, because if someone's tapping you on the shoulder and your head's in the sand, you really can't ignore that. And so people are essentially being forced to pick a side. They're being forced to do something about it. And as these rifts grow wider and the state entities continue to treat everyone like they always have, they're going to eventually find out, they're going to overturn a lot more rocks that have Bundy Rancher types underneath them, as opposed to just, boomers who have more to lose than standing up for their rights allows them to.
Yeah, that couple in St. Louis, right? The liberal lawyer who pulled out his gun when the people were coming through his neighborhood. That's traditional middle America. But like you said, a bunch of us, myself included, have steeled my resolve. It's like I'm just, not going to be a victim of this. Of this situation that they're trying to put us in. And I am smart about it by not putting myself in those kind of situations to begin with. But the other people who can't help it, who might be, stuck in a mortgage, or, had the wife take the kids and the money and now they're living in Detroit, or, just they're driving Reginald Denny style down the road and get pulled out of their car, but they happen to have a gun. It's just like there's it's an entire, what I think Winston Churchill or somebody said, the entire situation is like a stack of matches in search of a flame. That's where we are.
And then everyone who's seen, what happens to the Capitol rioters, you would get put in solitary confinement for an entire year without bail or trial. They're like, oh, well, I would actually personally rather be dead. And everyone could hypothesize about that before, but now we have living examples of, like, if the feds show up at my door and put me in handcuffs and take me away, there's a good chance I'm going to rot in a wet prison for the rest of my life. And so I would rather be dead than let that happen. So I think if some scenario came about in the future where the feds did exactly what they did post January 6th and just started going to people's doors and kicking them in and dragging them away, again, you would see a lot more people. I was a little disappointed to see no one stand up for themselves under those circumstances, but I think, again, it's going to happen. There will come a time where they kick the wrong door in, and things don't go the way they normally, because just like the way the military fights, with air superiority and with logistic superiority, and they can't fathom a scenario where they don't win. The same thing happens with, police and federal police forces, where, they kick someone's door in and they've never not outgunned the people that are inside the house. They've never not had more body armor. They've never not had the element of surprise. And one of these days, they're going to kick the wrong person's door in, and they're going to be in a scenario that they were not prepared for at all. And then it's just.
You still there? Did we lose him, Cherie?
Just dropped off for me.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think that Templar, in the middle of his speech, has left the chat. We hope that he'll be back on. Maybe he was silenced because he was speaking too much truth. But that is what you're going to get on this show. You're going to get lots and lots of truth, and we really hope that he is okay wherever he might be. Cherie, do you want to take this opportunity to expound on any thoughts that you might have?
I would, but I think I already said my piece earlier.
You're just scared that something's going to happen to you like what happened to Templar just now.
Well, I mean, I like to
No.
play it safe, but I'm not really too worried about that.
Oh, that's true, because we live in a remote fortress and are completely protected by our squad of goons in the volcano.
Hmm.
This is true. But yeah, and apparently he's just dropped off the internet altogether. So maybe his internet went down. There were some storms his area. So maybe we want to just wrap this up, because I don't like doing anything without my friend. You know, basically, so he had mentioned, Templar had mentioned before his untimely demise, uh, the Amish, and here we are outbreeding our enemies. You know, I mean, this is the absolute truth of the matter, and I don't mean just like outbreeding as in, you know, babies popping out, but that one is true too. There's a good saying that says the future belongs to those who show up for it. Well, me and you are not going to be here in the future. We're going to be dead.
We're not.
We're going to be dead. We're going to be dead, whether it's 20 years from now or 60 years from now or 100 years from now. We're simply not going to be here. But our progeny, our cultural contributions, the trees that we plant today will be here tomorrow. And so if we can outproduce our enemies, which we do, then we're going to win. You know, we are also, by the way, the producers, not just of children, but of food, of goods, of inventions, of things of cultural value, all of that. And there's no way that we can't win in that particular scenario. Even, you know, like with the collapse of the Roman Empire into decadence, right? People were trying to copy what they did for the next 1,500 years until they actually could start copying it. And even now, we don't know, like, things like Greek fire. We don't know things like how the Romans made concrete the way that they did. And, you know, and so we still are trying to aspire to what they did. And that's what the people that come after us will be doing, because we are the producers. They will not be following this neoliberal order. They won't be following the G.A.E., the globalist American empire. They can't. The you know, you always hear that phrase, you know, we're on the right side of history. If you have to yell that at the top of your lungs while beating someone with a police truncheon, then you're on the wrong side of history. It's manifest. It's obvious. We know how to make toilets that flush. We know how to make clean water that runs safely and routinely. We know how to keep the lights and the power on. And they simply don't. You want proof? Look at South Africa. You want proof? Look at Venezuela. You want proof? Look at China. You know, or you know, I mean, any of these kinds of places. Even high functioning societies like India have a lot of trouble. You know, and if it wasn't for natural resources, you'd see the same thing in the Middle East. So we will show up to the future because we can sustain the push that keeps entropy at bay, because we understand how to harness the natural world instead of trying to destroy it and rebuild it in the image of a human, an ugly image of a human, not the beautiful image that God created. So that's really where we are and where we're standing. And that's where we will be in the future. We will win, and the future will look like us. And that's really all that I have to say. And I believe that that's all that Templar would have had to say before his untimely demise. Ms. Cherie, I know you have to have the floor now, because I've said my piece and Templar has vanished.
Well, you're putting on the pressure. I do agree with that there in red, we outbreed our enemies because demographics are the future, plain and simple. We are the pioneers. Yes, we are the pioneers. We are the creators. We have all these God-given talents that, you know, we can't let the light, you know, die out on.
Right. And our enemies are trying to extinguish that. You know, they are trying to extinguish anything that is beautiful that they can't control. You know, in their grasping fingers. And they can't control this kind of stuff. They simply cannot. You know, it was Christendom that brought the scientific revolution. It was Christendom that brought the new ways of thinking that they call the Enlightenment, for good or ill. It was Christendom that outlawed slavery, and it's Christendom that will survive the collapse of the system that Christendom made by the enemies of Christendom, right? The system that the globalist American empire, are trying to collapse is made by us. Nobody knows better how to rebuild a situation than the engineer who already built it, and that's us. I think I've said my piece. I am ashamed
I think you
to
have
say,
too.
Mr. Commander Culture is now speechless. He's not afraid. He's not afraid that what befalls the Templar will befall him, but I have no doubt that we will be rejoined by our good friend at some later date. Ms. Cherie, any concluding thoughts?
I just pray that what is going on in Ukraine does come to an end. It's gone on too long as it is right now, in my opinion. So
yeah, a swift end. The longer that the thing in Ukraine goes on, the more Ukrainian people will die. I'm here on record to say at the close of this broadcast that the globalist American empire is attempting to create a Syria situation in Ukraine, basically a forever war that they can use to generate destruction on Russia's borders and against Russia's interests, in the belief that it will strengthen themselves, because they, like the crazed lunatics that they are, believe that destruction gives them some kind of power, where the only power comes from creation and from a faith in God. So with that statement, I will close out the broadcast. I want to thank everyone for listening. For Commander Culture, or for Templar, and for Ms. Cherie, this is Commander Culture. This has been a thing between white people, as Whoopi Goldberg would say. Tomorrow belongs to you. To the stars.